Hey Pedro, how are you?
Hey, Patrick, good to see you again, man.
Yeah, it's good to have you back on. I'm excited to chat about agro and commodities in Brazil. You're one of my favorite followers for the subject, so I'm excited.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you having me on again.
Yeah, but how have you been, man? So I guess it's the off season for basketball. Are you doing any coaching? You running the kids up hills or anything? What's going on?
Yeah, actually, a little bit of that. We are, and the problem is, Patrick, I try to do it with them still, and I think I'm getting too old for, and I'm trying. I try to lead by example, but oh man, I tell you what, the body parts start to hurt. But no, it's good. We had the Olympics, which was absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of guys in my basketball circle, but I even on Twitter, social media, et cetera,
Yeah,
they said, give me 82 games of Olympic rules basketball instead of the NBA, because I mean that's real basketball. The FIBA basketball, I can say as a pure basketball lover, that's the way basketball should be played. The NBA is more of a marketing product. Look, these guys are incredibly talented in the NBA. I mean, there's no denying that, the best players in the world. But my goodness, they have tweaked the rules in the past few years, Patrick, that I mean, to make it too easy to score. And these guys are so talented, they're going to score. But then you go play FIBA for international basketball. And you saw, I mean, I don't know if you got to watch, but I mean, especially the semifinal and the final games and the U.S. games versus Serbia, Germany and
yeah.
Serbia. I tell you, those were just, I mean, unbelievable games. Excuse me, Serbia and France. And I just, anyways, as I could go on talking about basketball forever, but we had the treat of FIBA basketball, and it was a joy to watch. The boys loved it. It was fun.
Yeah, awesome, man. So what's going on at work then? You're doing some conferences, speaking. What are you seeing
Yeah,
in agro markets?
that's right. I'm in Brazil right now doing a little bit of a tour. I have three speeches here in the interior part of Brazil this week. It's always good. I always say that, that people hire me to come do these speeches to hopefully teach them something, show them something about the markets. But every single time that I come out, I learn something different, and I come here to teach, but also with an open mind to learn things, because at the end of the day, no matter how much you think you know, there's always something new. There's always, especially being on the ground, talking to the people on the
Mm-hmm.
ground. So I really love these opportunities that I get to come here from time to time. I mean, I actually turned down a lot of speaking engagements just because of travel, right? I try to control my travel as much as I possibly can. I want to be around the family. I don't, I could speak every week of the year, but I'm not going to do that. So I pick and choose my events, but it is a joy being here. I can tell you that. I'm talking to the farmers. Farmers are a little apprehensive, but
Mm-hmm.
let me rephrase that. They're not as apprehensive as the media makes it sound like they are. Make it sound like they are. They're not. Why? Because, the biggest drought in Brazilian history. Listen, stop. Just stop with the nonsense. I mean, yes, there's been, don't get me wrong, it is dry in the center region of Brazil. There's some regions that haven't had rains for 90 days, 100 days, 120 days. And people are like, Pedro, so how are you saying there's no drought? There is a drought, but this is common for these areas. This is par for the course. Now, obviously not to the extent that we're having it, but what I can tell you is farmers will start getting anxious if rains don't arrive by early October. Then when you put how long we've been without rain, which yes, for the most center region Brazil, like center south Brazil or center north Brazil, is par for the course. But yeah, if the rains don't arrive in October, then it becomes a problem. These guys are going to get a little more tense. But for now, the forecasts say the rains should be arriving at the last few days of September and normalizing in October. So fingers crossed. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I would be remiss since you're on the ground to maybe clarify for listeners a bit. There's been huge fires in Brazil. I mean, I've seen pictures of smoke plumes going all the way to Paraguay. I heard flights delayed. The
Yeah.
big story I heard was São Martinho, which is one of the largest sugar producers in the world. I saw estimates 20,000 hectares of just their farms impacted. I've seen estimates of hundreds of thousands of hectares of sugar total. So, what can you tell me about sugar and the effect of the
Yeah.
fires?
And again, going back to once you're on the ground, again, I've known
Yeah.
about these fires. I've been here. I was here in July, just came back. I come here maybe once every 40, 45 days or so. And it's interesting this time, even just flying. I'm in Goiás State right now, and flying from São Paulo State to here. As we were arriving, you're looking down, and I mean, just a lot of burnt ground. Now, again, let's put it all in perspective, right? I'm not saying it's not generalized, it's not everywhere, but there's a lot more than what I have ever seen. The good part is a lot of it seems to be relatively controlled at this point. It's dry weather, it's hot. Do I believe that's the only cause of these fires? I mean, it's hard. You and I can go on a rabbit hole here real quickly to talking about this, but at the end of the day, it is dry and hot, and the fires spread very quickly once they get started. And it's been hurting. I mean, now again, the market absorbs all that also because you mentioned sugar. It's some of the sugar crop that was still on the ground. But like when you talk in soybeans, corn, there's no soybeans, there's no corn on the ground right now, right? Yeah. So, and some of the, I mean, I heard something, coffee regions, that's been absolutely minimal. So even the sugar market has really taken this in stride because the losses have been minimal compared to overall production. But that does not reduce humanitarian tragedies. I mean, these things, I mean, you're talking about some crazy wildfires approaching farmhouses and things like that, and people that work on the fields. And of course, you never want to see anything like this. So it's something to be mindful of, but I think we need to separate things. The humanitarian impact is much, much, much bigger than the agricultural production impact due to the time of the year that it is happening. And it's a lot of fallow ground.
Yeah, I hate to be morbid about it, but there's another natural disaster or tragedy in Rio Grande do Sul, the huge flooding. And we talked a little before we got on. It's the same thing, right? So have the agro markets priced in the impacts of the flooding and what it'll do to crops? Is there anything still ongoing?
That was so minimal. What I mean by that is this. Let me make sure that I clarify.
I know what you mean.
It was incredibly awful for those directly involved. Farmers lost a decent amount of crop, and you feel for the Rio Grande do Sul farmers that, man, I'll tell you what, Patrick, if you want to speak in soccer terms, I mean, they were winning the game 2-0 at 45 minutes in the second half. And I mean, things looked fantastic after 3 straight years of crop issues that they had, 2 straight years of drought, stricken crops. And then this year, things were looking fantastic right prior to harvest, and then the flooding happens, right? So it was heartbreaking to see. When I say it's minimal compared to the overall Brazilian production, right? So let's not minimize the impact that this had for the guys on the ground, the guys and the girls on the ground. And by the way, the exponentially impactful was the effect on the humanitarian side of it, right? So the humanitarian side for me was something that it was just absolutely awful to see, because the people most impacted, unfortunately, were the people that didn't have the means to pick up and leave. They couldn't do it. The people in Porto Alegre and around some of the big cities in Rio Grande do Sul, these people, they're surviving, Patrick. They're just trying to survive. And then something like this comes and the infrastructure around them is not the best.
Yeah, I had a fund manager on that lives in Rio Grande do Sul, and I asked him, I said, do people have house insurance? And he said, no one had flooding insurance. Like, this doesn't happen. So it's like, if you lost your house, you lost your house.
It was awful. And again, it happened to the people that can least afford this to happen. So the ones that managed to survive, then again, when this was happening, I made a point very quickly. Listen, stop talking about soybeans. Yes, we have clients down there. We have some clients that lost some soybeans and things like that. But at the end of the day, Rio Grande do Sul still produced a pretty decent crop. So what I say, what the impact for crops was minimal. Again, if you're on the ground and you're seeing your crops drown, of course, it doesn't feel minimal. But again, that was not the story there. As you saw, the markets digested that back 3-4 months ago. It was barely a speed bump because the market really tanked from June all the way to August, right after all of that happened, because the market realized, oh my gosh, Brazil is still going to harvest 150 million metric tons of soybeans. So, if Rio Grande do Sul lost 1.5, 2 million metric tons, it's awful for the people on the ground, but there's no real impact in the overall picture. But the humanitarian side of it, it was absolutely heartbreaking, And I wish people in the media and maybe spend more time giving attention to that humanitarian side. And let's be fair, they've done so. But for me, the agricultural impact was a grain of sand compared to the humanitarian impact.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to soy then. I'm excited to have you on at a different time of year. The last time we spoke, I think it was mid-November-ish. They were starting to plant, and people were already talking about potential yields. But you already mentioned no soy on the ground right now. So what should investors be looking at? What are you paying attention to?
Listen, things look good. I can tell you that for now, as long as the rains arrive by early October, things look really good. And also, if you look at your forecast maps, you look at your radars and people that follow all these things, you can pull it up. Rains have returned to southern Brazil. So you got Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, Paraná, Paraguay. You have some really, really good forecasts for the next 10 to 14 days in that area. And those guys usually start planting relatively earlier, and that's going to help them. It's been dry, but these rains that are coming, or at least, again, they seem to be coming, right? Weather's always tricky, but the forecasts are outstanding for southern Brazil for the next 10 to 14 days. The center-north region of Brazil, the Cerrado region, continues dry until late September, early October, which, by the way, it's seasonal. It's very interesting. Every single year, Patrick, it's like people don't learn. And it's like, my goodness, we should never talk about planting pace in Brazil until mid-October. Don't even talk to me about planting pace until it's mid-October, right? So again, the guys that are trying to do it, money flows. It's people are trying to sell their stories and sell subscriptions and whatever it is. But at the end of the day, so far, as long as the forecasts are correct, the extended forecasts, and we always tell our clients, we cannot put a lot of faith in extended forecasts, right? But they're there, and they're showing that rains apparently will arrive seasonally right there around the beginning of October, end of September.
Okay, cool. So a positive outlook moving forward. But
yeah. All right. So I'll finish those thoughts is, but right now I have absolutely no worries about the soybean production in Brazil. Okay. The USDA has the crop at 169 million metric tons. You got to remember that that's just, they take a dart, they throw it on a wall. They're like, okay, here's what's, meaning, of course, it's not simply like that, but that is not the real starting point. And for those of you that, again, saw our podcast last year, Patrick, you remember I pounded saying, guys, 162 is not the starting point. Yes, we have a major drought in Brazil. We had a major drought in Brazil last year, but you have to take 20 to 25 million metric tons off of 175 to 180, not off of 162. And that's exactly what happened, right? So this year, folks are going to make the same mistake again. They're going to say, 169 is the starting point. It is not. Soybean area, despite what's happening with prices, et cetera, is increasing again in Brazil, roughly 1.5% to 2%. That's what we think. So it's not the 3-4% increase that we've seen in years past, but still, when you put a 1.5% to 2% on top of the area that's already being planted, that is no small increase, right? So you're talking about a potential here easily. If you talk about max potential for the Brazilian crop, 180 to 185. So when droughts start to happen, and say you and I talk again in December, January to update what's happening, say we've had a drought, we have to take off from 180 to 85. Another way of putting it, the USDA at 169 is already penciling in, 10 to 15 million metric ton reduction in the crop. Now, they won't tell you that, but that's what that number says. So let's make sure you keep that in your back pocket as we go forward.
Yeah. So the last time we spoke too, you were also very clearly neutral to bearish on price. I think I remember you saying, I have no reason to be bullish, and until I'm bullish, I'm not going to call for a price increase. And, since then, been down, right? Soybean prices have dropped. So what happened? How did we get here? Why are soybean prices low?
We have too many soybeans, too much supply. It's really as simple as that. We have too much supply. We are looking now at the USDA printed 134. Now, there's a USDA report here in about an hour. They're going to maybe tweak those numbers a little bit. But listen, the U.S. is harvesting a record crop. U.S. has never harvested over 121 million metric tons. This year, they're going to harvest somewhere around 125, plus minus 2 million metric tons. That's irrelevant right now. The point is, in the last USDA report in August, USDA placed world stocks of soybeans. Again, stocks. For those of you, what about demand? People, stocks already take demand into consideration. You take supply minus demand, and you have what's left over. And the U.S. is already penciling in 134 million metric tons of world stocks for the 24-25 season that has begun now. And the point is, even if that number, of course, that number is going to be tweaked in the next few months, right? Because USDA is using 169 for Brazil. All right, that number, is it going to be 178? Is it going to be 162? We don't know. We got to see what the weather does. But the point is, The old record of world stocks was 114 million metric tons back in 1819. And only 3 years ago, we were looking at world stocks sub 95 million metric tons. Now we have stocks going, let's call it 130, above 130, 130 million metric tons. The story in soybeans is that there is no bullish story whatsoever on the fundamental side. As a matter of fact, the market must go down quickly to try to reduce soybean area in the United States. Now, again, the market doesn't move in a straight line. And back in August, we told our clients when we saw soybeans with a 9 handle, we've been telling our clients all year long, if the U.S. has a decent crop, you're going to see a 9 handle on beans. That's exactly what happened. Now, we told them, hey, the market won't go straight on a straight line now. The funds are pretty heavy on the sell side, on the short side. Between August and September, you're going to try to see maybe a little bit of a rebound, and that's exactly what's happening. People are now trying to find bullish reasons, but this is all noise. This is all day trading. This is all algorithm stuff. At the end of the day, listen, the background is incredibly bearish for soybeans, and the best cure, Patrick, for low prices is even lower prices. You need to incentivize demand, and you need to decentivize the growth in soybean area. That ain't gonna happen in Brazil. Economically speaking, the farmers still making money down here, even with the prices where they are right now. Oh, I'm not making money. The guys that tell you that are the guys that did not hedge properly, that have been holding beans for 2 years and that paid very, very expensive inputs 2-3 years ago and are holding on to their beans. And of course, now they won't make money. But at current input costs and current soybean prices, the farmer's still making a decent margin. And of course, they're going to plant. So we have to hope that the U.S. reduces soybean area somehow next year. Otherwise, we could be in for a long, long, long bearish cycle here, very similar to the one that we saw between 2014 and 2020.
Are U.S. producers still profitable at current prices too, or is that only true of Brazil?
We have an issue with U.S. production. It's not a straightforward answer here, Patrick, because subsidies play a major role in the U.S. mathematics, right? If you pencil in pure economics, right? If you say at current prices, are farmers making money? The answers to a lot of that is no, right? But you have subsidies that guarantee that they are going to have a minimum price. They're going to be able to plant. And so I believe that U.S. subsidies do a disservice to the world market. They might do a service to the U.S. farmer, and a lot of farmers may feel that way. But I recently saw a post on X, a U.S. farmer saying that exact thing. And I actually sent him a private message, and I basically congratulated him on having that clear mind and understanding, because the subsidies do not allow the market to do its job efficiently. What is the job of the market, Patrick? The job of the market is to find a point of equilibrium prices between supply and demand. However, when you have heavy subsidies playing a role that don't allow market response, a farmer response to low prices, you have a problem. And that ends up extending the low price cycles. And actually, it shortens the high price cycles. So again, it's a problem. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have the answer.
So I want to ask you that about Argentina on the soybean supply side before I ask you about demand. Has anything changed in Argentina since Malay's come in? Has their production come up? Because they're a relevant producer to an extent, right?
Yeah, they are absolutely relevant, right? Again, they're not. Argentina has its place in the soybean market and it knows it. It's a different role than what Brazil plays and than what the U.S. plays. They're a very, very large and incredibly relevant soybean product exporter, soybean oil, soybean meal. But no major material changes, meaning the farmer is going to plant an area that's similar, a little bit higher in soybeans this year. They're going to have maybe the max potential there somewhere around 55 to 60 million metric tons, maybe not that high, maybe not as high as 60. But that's their place in the market right now. You should not look for any material changes in expectations of crops in Argentina. Now, that being said, Argentina is incredibly competitive. Again, soybean product exports. Soybean exports, not so much, but they still have a relevant place. I mean, if they can get their exports, soybean exports backed up towards 10, 12 million metric tons, that takes away from the U.S. It doesn't take away from Brazil. It takes away from the U.S. because Brazil and Argentina are a lot more competitive than the U.S. Brazil is going to export. The U.S. has a problem in the soybean market. But now in the corn market, it's a little bit of a different story because Argentina is also playing a major role. It's interesting, Patrick. The U.S. last year exported around 42 million metric tons of corn 2 years ago, I guess. This past year, U.S., the corn exports have been on a tear of the U.S. And that's been outstanding to see. Why? Because Brazilian farmers held on too long, thinking that the market was coming to them. And the market said, thank you very much. I'll just go get it elsewhere. I'll get it from the U.S. and I'll get it from Argentina. So last year, Brazil was first place in corn exports, 58 million metric tons sold. It's an incredible amount. This year, Brazil is going to be lucky to do 35.
Really?
It's absolutely crazy. And the U.S. is going from 42 to close to 60. And Brazil is potentially going to go from first place in the U.S. in world corn exports to third behind Argentina, because Argentina could approach 40 this year.
And that's even with 2 harvests, right? So that's even being...
Well, again, it's not a production story because, Brazil produces 120 million metric tons. Argentina produces 60 or 55. But Argentina exports the majority of its corn.
So does the delta that doesn't get exported in Brazil is just domestic consumption?
Yeah, or stocks that are going to be left over, and farmers are going to have to deal with that too.
Let me ask you about stocks then, because I own the Kepler Weber, which is the largest grain silo company in Latin America, right? And one of the bull cases for their business is that people say Brazilian farmers don't have enough grain storage, right? There's a delta between production and what they're able to actually store on the farm. Is that true? Do you know give me any insights?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely factual. That's been changing.
Yeah.
And the change is almost, I don't want to use the word exponential, because that would be a little exaggerated, but I'm trying to give you an idea that the change is happening fast.
Yeah.
Farmers they're building silos everywhere in Brazil. They understand, the farmers starting to understand we're producing a lot and we have to have the ability to store if need be. Now, that being said, storing isn't always the answer. I've been telling these guys down here, you guys thought storing corn was the answer. You thought storing beans for 2 years was the answer. Well, you got it wrong because you're not on an island. If you store corn, guess what? Ukraine's going to sell. Argentina's going to sell. U.S. is going to sell. Now, unless Brazilian producers, U.S. producers, Argentinian producers, Ukraine producers all get together and form the OPEC of corn. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a different story. Okay, that ain't happening, my friend. So the whole point is you're not in an island. You're not alone on an island where you can I tell these farmers down here, because people try to just pounce their heads with, you're being manipulated. The buyers are manipulating. And I was like, no, they're not. The buyers have a role to play. You have a role to play. You are nothing without the buyer. The buyer is nothing without you. It's a capitalist market, and you got to understand how to play the game. So understand what tools are there at your disposal to maximize your gains, to maximize the price in which you're going to sell, or to protect yourself. And if you're going to store, please don't do it so naked, right? Protect yourself. And a lot of them, they're building storage, but they are still falling behind on marketing, right? They don't understand how to use the proper protection tools to protect that crop that they're investing millions of dollars to be able to store. So again, I went off subject a little bit to talk about marketing, but the storing silo part in Brazil is absolutely happening and is going to continue growing. I just hope that the farmer also learns how to manage the marketing side of it.
So I guess global corn is the same story as soy. Prices have been down because there's oversupply. Is that
basically it's fair? It's fair. I think that corn balance sheet is not as loose, quote unquote, as the soybean balance sheet. I think the soybean market has a much more bearish story. I'm not talking about day trading. I'm not talking about today's USDA report. I'm talking about, overall, when you look in the background, we are in a down cycle of soybean prices. You're going to see rallies, counter cycle rallies. You're going to see it. It's normal, but those rallies are going to be sold very quickly because the market has one job to do right now. It is to find the point in prices at which demand comes back stronger and or supply is reduced. Again, climate also plays a role, right? If we have major issues in production, all of that will play a role. But the corn market is very similar. I just think the soybean market is more bearish than the corn market at this point.
Okay. And then what about the demand side? We talked a lot about supply, but has demand increased less? Is that playing a part?
You hit the nail on the head, Patrick, right there. You chose the perfect words to describe it, because it's not that demand fell off the face of the earth. No, China is still buying a lot of soybeans. China is hopefully going to buy over 110 million metric tons of soybeans. I have a really, really good chart that I believe I actually posted on X already, but that shows the Chinese demand, right? So how the Chinese demand has evolved in the past 20 some years. And I go 5 years by 5 years. I go 2005 to 2010. The growth percentage was this. And then 2010 to 2015, 15 to 20, and 2025. I can tell you that it went from a 95% growth between 2005 and 2010 to only a 10% growth between 2020 and 2025. Now, obviously, the numbers get bigger. And so percentage-wise, that can be a little deceiving, right? But again, the growth isn't there. That needs to be not just from China, but from the rest of the world to be able to absorb all of the supply that's being put in the market. And one more note on supply, Patrick, it cannot go unnoticed that we have lost in the last 2 years somewhere around 80 million metric tons of soybeans due to droughts. So we shouldn't let that go unnoticed.
So we should have even more supply than we actually do.
Absolutely, right? So we lost 80 million metric tons due to droughts. Brazil this past year lost 25. Argentina last year lost 25. U.S., last year, now this year they're harvesting now, lost 10 to 15. Paraguay has lost in 2 years combined somewhere around 10 to 12. Again, that number actually goes over 80 really quickly if you're really dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But the point is we are oversupplied. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think going back to what we mentioned about headlines getting the story wrong or only partially correct, a lot of people look at the price and it's down and they go, oh, China demand is collapsing. When in reality, it's not. It could still be increasing by 3%, but if a supply increases by 10, then you still get a price decline. So if China isn't collapsing, populations are still growing globally. People still need to eat, but the farmer got out ahead of demand, I guess.
You hit the nail in the head. That is perfectly put, Patrick. I don't need to add anything to what you just said. Excellent.
Okay. Well, what else? Anything more about corn and soy before I ask you a couple of other more niche markets that I'm curious about?
Yeah, I think the overall is just, let's be careful. You just said it, right? Headlines, people, please stay away from those headlines. It's so easy. I did in my speeches, I have 2 slides that I love. And I can share these with you. Basically, when you have these websites that you can create your own headline or whatever, right? So I was playing around with that because I wanted to prove a point to my clients. And I went in and I created 2 different headlines for the same data. I took the same data in soybeans and I took the same data in corn. And I generated 2 separate headlines. So the picture followed by the headline. So all I did was change the picture and the wording on it. That's all I did, Patrick. And I put those side by side and I showed them and they're looking. And I said, which headline would you click on? During the speeches. And sometimes, I speak for 2,000 people. Sometimes I speak for 50. Sometimes, but the majority, doesn't matter where, they go, the one on the left. Well, the one on the left, I put a picture of the drought-stricken soybeans or corn. And I say, for instance, let's just say this year, the U.S. is going to produce 380 million metric tons, roughly 380, 385. The potential, say, could have been 400 or 395. And I say, U.S. loses 10 million metric tons or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? I focus on the negative, and then I put an ugly picture right there that the farmer's going to be, let me click on this. Because why? The farmer wants to see prices going higher, so they're going to click on the headline that tells them so. And the media knows that, Patrick. And I did that exercise to show them how easily headlines can be manipulated and stories can be manipulated. So if you don't really understand what's happening, you're relying on headlines, you're in for some trouble, man.
Well, what's even crazier, too, is that there is a relevant amount of money that trades on algorithms that'll scan just for the headline. And we talk about, cyclical upturns that might not make sense based on the fundamentals. You get a couple of these headlines and enough algorithms based at the market on a daily basis, right? And
that's all you need. That's all you need. And that's a great point that you just mentioned. Today, USDA report day, right?
Yeah.
The algos are going to be going crazy right after the report. Will the USDA say anything today that will fundamentally change the market? Absolutely not. I can guarantee you that. There is nothing the USDA can say today, nothing that will fundamentally change the oversupply nature of these markets. Now, the algos are going to be focused on, is the U.S. crop going to reduce 1 million metric ton, 2 million metric tons? They're nitpicking. Again, these are algorithms fighting each other for headlines, for numbers. And the problem is that Say the market goes up 30 points today because the algorithms had a party. Farmers are going to fall for that trap instead of understanding, man, we are oversupplied. I just saw a dollar rally from the low in August. I better advance my sales here. I better protect myself. They're not going to think that way. They're not going to think that way. They're going to say, ooh, the market went up 30 points. It's going much higher. We're not oversupplied. These guys saying that are crazy. That's how things happen, right? So headlines are incredibly dangerous. But again, that's part of the rules of the game we play. You got to understand the rules of the game. If you're going to be in the commodities markets, you must understand that you're going to have counter fundamental rallies or downturns, right? If you're in a high cycle, if you have, man, we are undersupplied, we have too much demand and prices should be going higher. Even during those times, you have some very volatile sessions that prices go down very, very hard. And, that doesn't change the overall structure of the market. So the same thing is happening right now. We are oversupplied. We are absolutely in a down cycle. We are in a bearish mid to long-term market and trend, but you're going to have these counter fundamental rallies. And our message is know how to take advantage of them unless something happens that is not priced in. So I call it, unless we need, Patrick, a demand shock or a supply shock, possibly both combined, to flip this market from an oversupplied market, bearish market, to an undersupplied, bullish market. And what is that demand shock today? I don't know. Again,
I was getting like historically, what would a demand shock for corn look like? What happens that people double their corn consumption?
2005, 2006 U.S. biofuel policy.
So it's a technological innovation. It's not human consumption ever. Yeah.
Really, that wasn't even just technological. That was a political influence in the market. Okay. It changed everything because now, wait a second. The U.S. is going to have to burn 140 million metric tons of corn in order to make fuel. That wasn't there before. That's a shock. That's a demand shock. The Chinese going from importing 5 million metric tons or 10 million metric tons of soybeans in 2000 to, I don't have the number on top of my head, but in 2010, that number was close to 70 million metric tons. That changed the market, right? That was a shock. And so I don't know where that supply. So 4 years ago, right, when the Democrats took over in the U.S., everybody was up in arms. All the funds bought soybean oil because, the Democrat government is now the biofuels. They're going to send a lot of soybean oil to biofuels and blah, 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 blah. Soybean oil is skyrocketing. Did that happen? No. Look at soybean oil right now. Soybean oil can't catch a break because, again, these headlines are most often, they don't tell the real story. They really don't. Yeah. And so you got to be careful. Now, Patrick, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we cannot have another demand shock. I just don't know where it's going to come from in the short term. I don't know.
There's no policy proposals or anything that the markets are watching closely that could have a real impact. I mean,
not in the short term. Now, in the long term, I'm going to go one further. You're going to need something to happen. By the way, the U.S. is going to have to figure out a way to use more domestic soybeans, either that or they're going to have to severely decrease soybean production. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen with the soybean market.
So then for maybe a more generalist investor, then if the headlines or Bloomberg articles are at best neutral, but sometimes just wrong and not useful for commodities markets, where should an investor that wants to learn more, what would you recommend for a research process? Obviously, your publication's fantastic, but where do you derive your source material from?
That's great. I think it all comes back to two things: experience and networking.
Okay.
Right. That's how the commodities market really works. And I think most industries, but I don't rely, for instance, I don't watch the news.
Yep.
I don't. The news are counterproductive for me, has always been. I don't, at our house, our boys don't even know what a news show looks like.
Nice.
That does not enter our house. Whether we're in Brazil, whether we're in the US, it's garbage.
Yep.
It's absolute garbage, and you know that.
Yep.
And so for us, you got to focus on the things that have real market impact. And it has taken me years, for instance, to develop the know-how and the networking. It is not just networking. You have to know who to contact in which case. Oh, okay, I have multiple contacts in Brazil. Not just because somebody's from Brazil means that they know what they're talking about, right? Or I talked to a farmer in Brazil. Which farmer? What's this farmer's tendencies? Again, I have contacts in China, in Russia, in the US, in Ukraine, and Europe, and whatever. And so at the end of the day, it depends on what that investor wants. If the investor wants to trade, okay, follow headlines and follow the algorithms and try to figure out what the algorithms are programmed to do and go at it. Because if that's what the objective is, you're really not looking to understand fundamentals. You're just looking to kind of understand what the rules of the game is and try to scalp some profit from the volatility. Okay. Now you're trying to actually understand fundamentals and long-term trends. Yeah, you absolutely need to find the people that you can get on the phone, old school, man, just like old school. You can get on the phone, you can have a video call now, mix the old school with the new school and have a true conversation, and often go on the ground and figure out what's really happening. But again, going on the ground means knowing where to go and who to talk to, and you need people to help you with that.
But you do read, do you read USDA reports you've mentioned, but do you read
of course
commitment of traders reports as well? You find that stuff interesting?
Of course, absolutely. And
okay.
You still have to do your research. You still have to go. And by the way, I understand what the USDA tendencies are. Do I know what the USDA is going to say? No one knows. But another thing, and to be fair to the USDA, I think the USDA catches a lot of flack. And I'm like, listen, people, understand something. The initial objective of USDA reports was to assist in U.S. farm policy. It was never to give the market numbers to trade. Yeah. And so folks need to understand that. And guys, well, the USDA is wrong. Yeah, the USDA gets a lot of things wrong. So do we, so do you. The point is, the data is manipulated. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm not going to go there. Now, do I think, for instance, the USDA, should the USDA know, for instance, right now, that they are overestimating U.S. demand for soybeans for 24-25? I hope that somebody in there knows it, because it's very obvious. It's very obvious. Now, if they don't know it, that's another problem that they're going to need to address. But it's very possible that they do know it, but they're saying, you know what? The Brazilian crop is just starting. There's a lot of things to happen. We have oversupply. Let me keep this number here to kind of keep the stock figure at a reasonable number, because if I put what actually could happen with the U.S. exports, this supply number could be much higher. And I mean, they could destroy the market right now. Yeah. And so do I think from time to time they could be having conversations like this? Maybe. But the point is, absolutely, right? Commitment of traders. It's absolutely important to know what the funds are doing. It's absolutely important to know how to dissect and how to interpret that report, how to dissect and interpret the USDA reports. Give importance to the numbers that are important, and then the rest, is just the rest. And then you have to have context around those numbers. It's also important to know, what are farmer sales like? How is the farmer behaving? For that, you need to have, there's no number that you can go that's printed. You need to have a network of contacts that allow you to get a decent estimate on what farmer sales are. And so, yeah, I read things like that, but do I sit and read media sources? No, I don't. I will see headlines. I might click on something and say, oh, this is crazy. Client might send me something and say, Pedro, does this make sense? I'll read it and I'll tell them, hey, actually makes a little bit of sense. Or I'll say, actually, it makes 0 sense. It's garbage, throw it out. So you dissect through those.
So you mentioned, networking sources on the ground. I got one coffee guy that I buy my coffee from at the farmer's market. His family owns a farm in Minas Gerais. He toasts it himself. He brands it. And last week he raised prices for the first time in I don't know, since I've been buying from him for a few years. So he raised it about, call it 10%. It went from like 35 reais for a half kilo to 40. Coffee prices look like they're towards the high end of their range, maybe looking to break out. Brazil's obviously the world's largest producer. So what's going on with coffee markets?
Yeah, and by the way, that's a fair increase in price given what's happening with the core market, with the coffee market. And I will debate you on whether coffee prices are getting ready to break out. I personally don't think so. I don't think there is a sustainable story for that, even though there are stories that justify, I would say, prices in New York above 200 cents, right? Maybe 220, but not 250, not 260, not 270. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't go there, because we just spent a decent amount of time talking about algorithms and the power of money flow, speculative money flow. So I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that couldn't happen, but I'm not going to sit here and bet on it right now. Why? Okay, let's touch on one of the stories. Oh, it's too dry in Brazil. Just stop. Yeah, it's dry. The coffee belt usually doesn't see rains until later half of September or first half of October. Now, if those rains do not arrive, very similar to soybeans, if those rains do not arrive, but even more important in the coffee market, because the coffee market is not oversupplied, for instance, like the soybean and corn markets are, right? So There's not a lot of cushion there in the coffee market now. It's not undersupplied, but it's right there in the point of equilibrium. And if you have a major issue with the Brazilian crop this year, then listen, we're going towards 300 cents or even higher in New York. But if the rains do arrive in October, and again, the extended models show that Minas Gerais is about to get some really nice rains here in the next few weeks. And if they come back and stay, things will normalize and the coffee market very likely goes back down to earth a little bit, towards 220, 200, something like that, and then waits to see how the next few months, how supply and demand develops in the next few months to decide, does it need to go to 170? Does it need to come back to 230-ish, right? But that's my read on the coffee market at this point. I don't believe, everybody wants to talk about the Vietnam story and this and that. And I mean, there's multiple stories, but the coffee market has done a really great job of staying relatively well supplied, even given some of the production issues that it's been having in different parts of the world here recently. So the Brazilian crop last year was a very large crop.
Yeah.
We can't forget that. But it wasn't as high as it could have been. True. But it was still a very large crop. So I just believe there's a little bit of a tendency to get a little too excited when these stories start to happen. We just saw what happened to cocoa recently, right? Orange juice, et cetera. Again, investors and speculators want to pound on a story and then headlines start chasing the money flow. You know how it is.
You just anticipated my next question, because the last time we talked about the run up and all the headlines orange juice prices were getting. And I was going to say, I feel like, every 8 to 12 months, one of these commodities is the commodity that people are looking at. And the chart is in fact like a bullish bubble looking chart, right? It's a straight line up. And for the past, 6 months or so, it's been cacao, right? It's been coca.
Right.
And I mean, from what I picked up from the little I know about it was that there's been some terrible supply problem in Africa and prices have been up. So what's the story behind that? Like, is it
and I'm not going to pretend to be a cocoa expert in any way, shape, or form, but these stories, they play out from commodity to commodity. It's very similar. Now, did the cocoa market have a initial story? Yes, it did. Did it have a very large fall in production that undersupplied the market temporarily? Absolutely. That nobody's making that up. But does it justify the run up in prices that we saw? Absolutely not. What happens is that, buying begets buying, and then the stories, again, the headlines will chase the story will chase the headline, and the money flow chases everything. And at the end of the day, you described very well, it's a bullish, bubbly looking chart. It is. There's absolutely no doubt that the cocoa market, the orange juice market is in a bubble. And when it pops, I mean, it'll be ugly. And I think it's coming very, very, very soon because these prices are not sustainable. Again, the job of the market is to find a point of equilibrium. These prices surpass the point of equilibrium, even though the job of the market was to take prices higher to reduce demand and increase supply, or to try to do that, right? But I mean, the run-up in prices surpassed any point of fundamental equilibrium a long time ago. The cocoa market kind of settling down here. OJ still a little crazy, but I just don't buy the story. We're not running out of orange juice. Now, do we have less oranges in the world and the orange juice prices go up? Yes. Same thing with cocoa. Yes. But is that the end of the world? It doesn't mean that prices have to go higher forever, have to go much higher than what they are right now. No.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. Brazil's such a powerhouse of agriculture that even with the cocoa price run up, they produce, I guess, a lot, maybe not for domestic consumption. So prices didn't increase at all here. I'm not a big chocolate eater, but it didn't move at all. The chocolate bars in the grocery store.
I'm buying my choquitos and my souffleurs and my diamante negros, and they're very similar prices than they were not too long ago. Now, maybe the package has gotten a little bit smaller, but who cares?
Yeah. All right, man. This was awesome. Are there any of the markets, anything else going on we should talk about before we wrap up?
No, I think obviously U.S. election is a big deal. It's interesting. The media is going to try to sell you the idea that, if Trump wins, the trade war comes back. And obviously the algorithms are going to chase that story. And so if Trump wins, the initial reaction is going to be likely selling soybeans, and Brazilian premiums are going to go, export premiums are going to go high because everybody's going to think, now, the trade war comes back and China's going to buy less soybeans out of the U.S. Folks, wake up. The U.S.-China relationship is much worse now than it was during the so-called trade war, which, by the way, was not a trade war. All it was a negotiation. It was negotiation tactics going back and forth. U.S. And the Trump administration wanted China to buy more from the U.S. I think that's a pretty reasonable request. And the Chinese play hardball like they always do. Don't blame them for doing that. And so it became a negotiation, right? But trade war aside, the Chinese are relying less and less in U.S. soybean export. That's just the story. And we have the data to prove it. And so it's interesting, right? These headlines are going to trade. You're going to have algorithms trading headlines about the election, or soybean trading algorithms trading headlines about the election. So you can see, or if Harris wins, soybeans are going to have an initial pop because, oh my gosh, no.
Yeah. China's
not coming back for U.S. soybeans simply due to economic reasons, unless that changes. If U.S. soybeans become more competitive than Brazilian soybeans, then China's going to buy more. But until that happens, so again, it's just to put that out there. You're going to have some headline trading around the U.S. election for soybeans that could impact some of the other markets, some of the auxiliary markets there, like corn, et cetera. But I think overall, just understanding we are in corn and beans, specifically in beans, in an oversupplied market. You will have counter fundamental rallies, right? Those are the opportunities that I believe producers need to take advantage, unless, again, we either have a supply shock or a demand shock, or maybe both. Other than that, we're in for some pain ahead for soybean markets until they find that point of equilibrium to bring demand back and maybe cut a little bit of supply.
Pedro, thanks so much for doing this. It was awesome. Every time I talk to you, I feel more informed and interested about the markets you cover. And like I said the last time we talked, I'm fascinated by it. I think the Brazil agro market is so underfollowed and so important. And yeah, like I said, I'm more interested than I was an hour ago when we started talking. Where should I send people to learn more about your publication, follow you on Twitter, LinkedIn? What are you using?
Thank you, brother. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, but only in Portuguese. My team convinced me I did not want to open an Instagram account, but a year and a half ago. So those of you that speak Portuguese, there's some interesting videos that I put out there. But for the international crowd, LinkedIn, really, I prefer X. X is where, I put some of the work out there. I pick and choose what I put there, fight the naysayers. And so X at PhD Chicago, at PhD Chicago, you can follow me and send me a direct message if you want to get in touch with me. Our publication, we have a weekly publication, but it's only in Portuguese so far. We provide some English-speaking consulting services too, but feel free to reach out to me. Those are the best ways. X at PhD Chicago.
Awesome. And I will link all that in the show notes, along with the last conversation Pedro and I had where he goes into his background a little more, and you can listen to the calls he made that he nailed about corn and soy prices. So thanks again, Pedro. We'll do it again soon.
Appreciate you, Patrick. Thanks for having me on, man.